Hey, welcome to the show. When I was younger, my first computer was a TRS-80 color computer. I learned a lot on that computer, but I didn't use it a whole lot. All my friends had a Commodore 64, and so I always wanted a Commodore 64. So about a year later, when I was about 14 or 15 years old, I got a Commodore 64 for my birthday. It was my favorite computer. I did so much on that computer. I learned to program on that computer. Started with BASIC, eventually learned assembly language, and wrote a lot of stuff, and had a blast doing it. Well, lately, I've kind of missed that computer, so I decided to buy one. I found a broken one on eBay, and I decided to buy it, and I got it for a good deal, and I decided, well, either I can try to fix it, or I can make it something different. So I found out that there's a Linux distribution that when you boot up into it, it boots up into a Commodore 64 emulator. They call this a Pi64, or the distribution is called Combian. So today we're going to look at it. First, we're going to look at the Commodore 64 and what I had to do inside of it. So please don't judge. I know I used a lot of hot glue. I'm kind of proud of it. It works great and it does everything I want it to do, including playing a lot of the old Commodore 64 games that I like. There's 3 screws that hold this case together. Once you get the screws out, you have to flip the case over to pull the keyboard off. Keyboard just lifts off. There's 3 tabs in the back that kind of hold it down. As you can see from the wiring mess inside, I'm not very good at cable management, but it all works. And that's what counts here. So my spaghetti mess of wires, each wire does something. Here we have the Raspberry Pi 3 with a special Raspberry Pi hat that I made that just pulls out one of the GPIO pins for easier access. This board here is the key to the whole project. It's called KeyRaw, and this board translates Commodore 64 keyboard into USB so the Raspberry Pi can understand it. Then I added a 3-port USB hub, and there's an Ethernet adapter in there, and then, or actually Ethernet pass-through, and then I have HDMI pass-through, audio pass-through, and power pass-through, so it's a standalone thing. This is what the screen looks like once the system boots up. It doesn't boot up into a grub screen, it doesn't boot into anything that looks anything related to Linux, it just boots right up into a Commodore 64 ready screen, which is actually kind of neat, and it boots up pretty fast. I would say a little bit slower than a actual real Commodore 64, but fast enough that unless you were a total Commodore zealot, you wouldn't notice that it was something different. You can write your basic code, and it runs just like a Commodore 64 would back in the day, which is pretty damn cool at this point. If you wanted to learn BASIC, this is probably a good place to learn it. Now, you might have noticed the blue button on the side of the Commodore 64 that I added. That brings you to the Vice menu. Vice is the emulator. I had to add that special because the Commodore 64 didn't have keys that I could hit to get into the Vice menu. The Vice menu is where you can configure the emulator. It's also where you select your disk images, which are stored on the SD card for loading. I built a special hat for this because I have plans on adding other circuitry to it. So right now that hat that you saw on there only has a pull out for the one GPIO pin that I'm using that maps that button to, I think, F12, which doesn't exist on the 64. So, games load up. This is a popular game. I'm not going to say the name of it for copyright reasons. Also, I don't have sound being piped through to my video capture because, well, actually, I just didn't think of it at first, but it's probably a good idea because of copyright stuff. Gameplay on this thing so far has been rock solid. The only games that I've had trouble running are games that it turned out were PAL, and my system's an NTSC system, and the video will be all screwed up. Games load really slow. Along with emulating the Commodore 64, it emulates the 1541 disk drive, and if you have ever used a Commodore before, you know that the 1541 disk drive was a slow beast. Now, when I was researching this, I did find out that some games that were a little more high-tech won't run, some demos won't run. Anything that needed to run in the memory of the 1541, since it's not a real 1541 emulator. So as you can see on this screen here, this is the Windows or the Linux. I'm gonna edit that out, but I'll probably forget. So you guys can laugh at me in the comments. I said Windows. This is the Linux distribution Combian, and this is where you can configure it and run. You can change your emulator. So it supports all the Commodore 8-bit systems, and you just select it, restart the system, and it'll load up that version of the Commodore 8-bit system. I don't even know what to call it. So I'll do a 128. So I can boot up as a 128. I haven't tried 128 80 column mode, but 128 40 column works perfect. I'm sure the 80 column mode works also. I just haven't thought to try it. I've booted up in all of those modes before. I've tried the 128 mode, I've tried the VIC-20 mode, I've tried the Commodore Pet mode. There was a weird CBM 5 mode, and they all work. Just the only one I'm familiar with is Commodore 64, which is fine with me. I think the Commodore 128 had an ugly color scheme. Wonder why they did the yellow. It's just too odd. I guess being used to the blue from the 64 just made this seem so foreign. Also, when I was a kid, I had borrowed a friend's 128 for a while because a program I had wrote used up all the 64's memory, and I used his 128 for a few months to optimize my code in a system that had enough memory. So that was actually pretty cool. So to get back to my 64, I just go back into that Vice mode, and I can change it here. Now the next time I reboot, it'll be a Commodore 64 again. It seems like key mappings and settings for keyboard mappings don't save across different emulators, so you probably have to set them up individually. Here we got a regular old bash prompt. It's running Linux underneath. The nice thing, since it has Ethernet, is that I can plug this into my network and I can SCP or SSH in to the box while it's running as a 64 and upload new ROMs. So you're not limited to just the ROMs that you put on there. You can, while it's running, add new ROMs. Go back into the Vice menu and select that ROM. I know I called them wrong ROMs. They're actually disk images. So it all runs really, really well. This is was a fun little project, and I would highly recommend it if you are into old 8-bit computers and you have one laying around. I got a good deal on this one. I think I paid $50 for it. It actually worked really well, but when I looked at the motherboard, I saw that it had a bad chip, and I thought to myself I could either replace the chip, it was just a memory chip, or I could do this project, and this project sounded fun. So now I have a Pi64 on my desk, and the nice thing about it is I could plop in another SD card and I could run full-on Linux on it if I wanted to, and it wouldn't even be a 64. Or I can run RetroPie and have an arcade emulator. It's limitless. It's just basically, at this point, a computer that I can do anything with, as long as it, the Raspberry Pi can handle what I want to do with it. Okay, so that was the project I've been working on for the past month, and I thought I'd share it with you. And it's a little different than the videos I normally do, but I still feel this is Linux related, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like and share if you want, and post comments, questions down below. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful night. Take care. Bye.